Did you say Scooby-Dooby-Doo?
Scooby-Dooby-Doo. What is it?
Like, how come a ghost from space keeps chicken and ham around?
You're right.
Well, you can never have too much chicken and ham, right, Shaggy?
You're right. You're right. I love that, Scooby. Okay, hello everybody. This is Gray over at Wakizashi's Teahouse in Japan. We're doing another recording about comics. This is me brother Mick. How you doing, Mick?
I'm well, thank you. It's lovely and sunny here in Germany.
Germany. Oh, we're talking about the weather again.
Yes, well, it's a nice day, so make the most of it.
That's good. It's been weird here, a bit of rain, but enough about the weather. What are we going to talk about, Nick? The British invasion.
We had some success with our comic stuff about the, the British comics, really, and especially 2000 AD, where a lot of the writers that we are going to discuss today got started. It was basically a hot pot of creativity, and a lot of the people who basically were working in 2000 AD ended up going across to America, starting with Alan Moore.
An enormous vertical weight in time that is bearing down upon a fragile present.
Alan Moore.
Was it
over in the corner of the store? It's a classic song someone wrote about it. I think it's on YouTube. I can't remember the name though.
Oh God,
the Alan Moore
I'm sure there is. There were I would remember when I was reading 2000 AD still. They would have the Future Shocks, and they would have the editorial room of Tharg and his robots, and there'd be posters up on the wall. Alec Trench lives on, and that was obviously Alan Moore. He must have made quite an impression. This huge guy with his massive beard and hair.
His beard is huge, legendary.
Moore was basically, I think, if we want to start up now. He started up as actually an artist in independent and music magazines. He was he had his the name Savage Pencil, I think, was his name. No, Kurt Weill. Savage Pencil was somebody else. Kurt Weill, as in Kurt Weill, which was the German composer of the Three Penny Opera, and he had an ongoing strip in Sounds, I think, called "The Stars My Degradation." With a cyborg character called Axel Pressbutton, who would go into psychopathic rage when you pressed a button.
Really?
And it was like a play on Alfred Bester, The Stars My Destination. And he was drawing this. And I think in an interview I read, you said, I was drawing comics for a couple of years before I realized I couldn't draw. So then he said, I decided to concentrate on writing. And as most freelancers were doing at the time, the best place if you were doing weird stuff or science fiction stuff was 2000 AD, and especially the Future Shocks. You would get a short, chance to show off your new talent, and they might give you a strip. So he started off with Future Shocks, and they realized this is a good writer. And they gave him the DR and Quinch series, characters he created, to psychopathic teenage delinquents, aliens, would go around nuking stuff.
I remember it.
Yeah. And then he did the Ballad of Halo Jones, which is also very good. It was basically, I think we've discussed this maybe in the last one, where it's the whole planet is basically unemployed, and, one way of getting out of these sort of floating spheres that you live in was just to leave the planet, And Halo Jones enlisted in the army and got off planet, and it was a whole ballad. But the thing with Moore was he was increasingly unhappy that he didn't have any creative control, or in fact that the characters belonged to Fleetway Comics. And that was an ongoing thing throughout his whole career, but especially at the time, a bit like Marvel and DC, it's the creators would write the stuff and draw it, but it would belong to the company. So he got fed up with that after a while.
Do you remember, Mick, we talked about Pat Mills? I was reading his biography, and he talks a lot about that. It was so annoying. They didn't get any kind of rights, did they, for the characters?
Were editing and writing and drawing the stuff, but Fleetway was getting the big bucks.
They owned all the IPs. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So what happened was Moore. There was an editor, we should mention, definitely, called Karen Berger, and she was already in 1979, I think she started at DC Comics as assistant editor to some guy whose name I've forgotten, and ended up actually being his editor while he was writing some superhero team. And she basically worked up to an editor position. And she'd obviously paid attention to Moore and thought he's interesting, and they were looking for a new creative direction for Swamp Thing, which Len Wein, I think, was writing at the time. And they thought, well, let's give this Brit a chance, So he was the first of the British invasion, the so-called, sort of it was like the early British invasion. And he took over Swamp Thing with the anatomy lesson, which I might have made a note of when it was. Before that, he'd also done Warrior magazine in England still. He'd written Marvel Man, which had to be changed to Miracle Man because of copyright issues. And he'd also done V for Vendetta, but the magazine got discontinued, so V for Vendetta never got finished. He later, I think, published it on.
What was that being published in, V for Vendetta?
Well, it was this Warrior magazine. It was an independent, where other people as well from our selection of Vertigo writers, Brits, were writing, but it went bust. And as far as I remember it, I did make some notes. I think they had some installments of V for Vendetta, but then the magazine folded, and it later got taken over by Vertigo and finished. And he was working there with David Lloyd, who also is one of the artists who later did stuff with Jamie Delano and some Hellblazer and stuff. And with Alan Moore, he did the whole of the of this V for Vendetta. And of course, you also later, jumping ahead a bit, when he put Watchmen out, he was with Dave Gibbons, who was another British artist who came from 2000 AD. But back to Alan Moore.
Individual issues, I completely missed all that. But I remember you gave me two different presents, maybe 2 birthdays. One was the collected edition, V for Vendetta, and the other one was Watchmen. So it was through you. I got those.
Yeah. I got into those later as well. I was already in Germany. I was living in Munich probably about 85, and I discovered those, through word of mouth, or I don't know how. And I got the collected editions as well. Oh yeah, I'd left the country in 1985. I was the first year in Munich. Perhaps it was 86 when I was actually living in Munich for more than a couple of months.
I didn't realize it was so long ago. No way, man.
Oh yes, I'm an old git.
Me too.
Oh, I emigrated when I was 19, It's like I got out of England as quickly as I could, And I discovered somehow Watchmen and V for Vendetta, and I think I bought them myself and then, gave them to you as presents. Yeah.
Very cool.
So, we kind of skipped over that a bit, but we was working at Warrior magazine, Marvel Man, V for Vendetta, and then, Len Wein said, well, why don't we try this British guy for Swamp Thing, And that was it. He revived it. And brought in, characters like John Constantine, the Spectre, the Demon, the Phantom Stranger, and Deadman. He brought them all into the Swamp Thing stories he was telling. It says here on my notes, 1986 was when Watchmen was published in individual issues and then collected, obviously, as a graphic novel. And 1988, he did The Killing Joke with Brian Boland, who was another British artist from 2000 AD who had been doing Judge Dredd mostly. And Boland became very popular for his covers with Vertigo, but also he drew the whole of The Killing Joke, where the Joker basically shoots Barbara Gordon and puts her in a wheelchair and tortures Jim.
He tries to make Jim go crazy, doesn't he? Trying to prove it just takes one bad day.
Just one bad day, and Batman's like, no, it was you all the time. It wasn't just anybody can have a bad day and go mad. So,
do you know,
so that was pretty
I've still
cool.
got mine, mate. I've still got my first edition. The one I bought it, Killing Joke.
Yeah.
Managed to bring it over to Japan as well, so it's still here with me.
Cool. And at some point after that, which I've not got written down... Oh no, that was actually Grant Morrison, so we'll come to that later. I was thinking of something, Arkham Asylum.
So Alan Moore was the first proper major.
Yeah.
Became popular, didn't he? British writer working for America. For the DC.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And, he did all these stuff for Vertigo, and then again he had creative differences. And, he ended up forming he ended up forming his own company, America's Best Comics, ABC. And he had characters like Tom Strong. And what was really good was Promethea, because he was getting into the occults and ceremonial magic by this time. Yeah. And Promethea was like a sort of manifestation of the creative spirits, which possessed people over the years. That was a really good comic.
I never finished that. I've read the first maybe 2 volumes, but I never finished it.
Yeah.
Terrible, I know.
I thought it was
Promethea.
pretty cool.
It's pretty complex, isn't it? It's pretty
It is a bit, yeah, because
deep.
he gets really into the tree of life and the symbolism of the sufferer and stuff like that. But I thought it was just a cool comic as well. The idea that this spirit possessed people, and once that it also possessed a man, who then made advances to his partner, who was a cop, and then shot him. You know, it's like because like, what, you queer, you know, and shot him.
Oh my goodness!
And,
how dare you?
That was done as a photo issue, I think. It was all photos with speech bubbles then on it. Yeah, there was some pretty good stuff in there. So I recommend
the old British magazines in Looking. The photo stories.
God. I love Johnny, but I also love Billy. I don't know what to do. You know. We had a picture of Dave Gibbons, didn't we, on the cover of Star-Lord, dressed up as a superhero.
That was a crazy cover. Mick, I was into Tom Strong. I was buying that. I really enjoyed that.
Oh yeah.
When he was writing it. But DC bought ABC, didn't they? They bought the company. It was crazy. Alan Moore couldn't escape them. They pretty much
couldn't
took
get
over.
away. This monolith like swallowing everything up like Warner Brothers or something.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think it's unfair that he gets quite a bit of flack? You know, he was naive. He shouldn't have signed the contract or something. You know, he gave away the rights to Watchmen. What do you think?
Yeah, but you know, it's like how often has that happened in history? You know, look at like rock and roll. You know, bands looking for the big break. Yeah, we'll give you we'll publish a record. And we're like, yes, we'll sign here. You know, Black Sabbath said we were ripped off, you know, completely for the first 5-6 years of our career. They completely took us to the cleaners. You know, well, that was just that was just vaudeville. That was just staged to get money for McLaren. You know, the whole band was just his way of getting money. You know.
Ever get the feeling
you've been cheated?
I always remember that.
So, Johnny, I mean, that's just typical. If you get into any kind of industry that's got the oomph to give you, you know, productive possibilities to bring out an album or a comic, of course you're going to say, yeah, I'll sign. And then later you figure out they've fucked me over here big time. Oh, sorry.
Where do I sign? It's like, did you read all the small print? No, I haven't got time for that. You know?
Of course not. I just wanted to get my stuff out. I'm a creator, you know, I'm an artist. I want to get my stuff out there for the public. And they're going, yes, we will do that for you. Oh, there's one little thing. We keep all the money and the rights to the characters. You know? What? I didn't read that. So that was the thing with Moore this whole life. But, you know, he rewrote a couple of novels later. He did one that was a bit weird. It was The Voice of the Fire, which was kind of taking place over various centuries based around the area where he came from, Northampton, which is kind of more or less in the centre of England, more or less east, west, north, south, you know, when you look at the borders. And that was quite interesting. And he wrote Jerusalem, which I got on Kindle, and you know I started, but it's about 1,200 pages or something. It was like one day I'll read it, you know, when I'm retired.
Yeah, maybe.
So I'm not sure what he's doing now. He did some erotic comics with his wife. I know that, something like
Lost Girls
or something. Yeah, sorry.
Lost Girls, I think.
Lost Girls, right?
Lost Girls?
Yeah, maybe something like that. Yeah.
He's just had a book out recently, Mick. He's had a book out. It's I think it's called The Great When or something, and it's part of a trilogy.
Okay. I might check out Jerusalem because I really enjoyed his comics. You know, he definitely revolutionized Swamp Thing, and I think I mentioned in the last video where they brought out one issue where they were like, we can't really publish this with a Comics Code stamp, and then they decided, what the hell, we'll just leave the stamp off, and that was it. It wasn't just Alan Moore. I looked into it later. Some other companies and some other titles had tried without the Comics Code stamp, which was basically self-imposed censorship. But when he was getting into necrophilia and stuff, they were like, oh. When his wife figures out that her husband's dead and been possessed by the spirit of her evil uncle magician, you know, it's like,
oh my god, that was crazy.
And all the mates he brings home from work are all like walking corpses. And then the illusion drops. He's like, ah.
There's also like a psychedelic issue, isn't there, where they take a basically, is it mushrooms or something?
Well, there's tubers that are growing on the Swamp Thing.
That's it.
You know, and then these like peyote or something, isn't it? So
yeah, they are like peyote, basically. Wow, that was crazy.
So there was some pretty mad stuff in there from Alan Moore, and he said, long may he continue. You know, about the age 40, he said, I got my midlife crisis. I didn't decide to buy a Jaguar. I decided I'll become a ceremonial magician. And he still brings out stuff. And I've seen like talks with him and performances, like, you know. And fair play to him. He's doing his thing.
He brought out like is it a hardcover of it's something like this, the Bumper Book of Magic or something. So it must be quite good.
First I've heard of it.
Anyway, so did you read the next Swamp Thing, Mick, back in the day? Were you reading it when you was writing it?
No, I really it passed me by.
Yeah, it passed me by.
I've read some of the collections since then. I've got a couple even of the collections. I think the first one, Love and Death, I think it's called. I've got the Titan Books version, and then they kind of don't really cross over properly with the American editions, but just recently got like the volume 3 or 4. A friend was just giving it away, you know, put it up on Facebook. Anybody want this? I'll take it. You know.
He did the issue before, the anatomy lesson. I think he kind of tied up the story.
Yeah, something like that. You're right there.
Like, no way. I had no idea because I've got the collection, like you said. I think it's Saga of the Swamp Thing, and it starts off with the anatomy lesson. I've got the old one, a very old edition. So anyway, Alan Moore. Look at you! You've done your homework. I'm impressed.
A bit. One of the characters he created was this Scouse magician called John Constantine, and he just turns up at some point in the bio. And there was a funny thing because somebody suggested a crossover between Constantine and the Vampire Lestat, because they were both based on Sting, the physical appearance. Sting was the rock musician when he was still younger and with the Police and that.
I didn't know Lestat was based on Sting. No way.
Oh yeah, that's what Anne Rice said. And so it's like, get Lestat and Constantine together because they're both basically based on the same real person. Yeah. But Constantine turns up in this. It's an issue of possibly more than one issue of Swamp Thing. And I guess then Karen Berger again decided this guy's got potential. And so they decided to make a whole series based around Constantine. I remember very well, again, I missed out on the very beginning. I started getting it with about issue 5, and I had the entire run then until it discontinued with about 130 or something. But I remember an advert in a different comic, and it was basically sort of, a picture of the first cover, which might have been also Dave McKean, I'm not sure. I'm basically saying a new form of horror. But then there was a quote from one of the issues basically saying, it looks at me and it looks at the priest. And I thought, this is the same old crap, the new form of horror. It sounds like the Exorcist. And of course, I didn't know what was happening. And then at some point, I checked it out in a comic shop, and it's like, this is actually pretty good. And Delano was quite an interesting character. Mm-hmm. He'd also worked in Marvel UK. Actually, he wasn't really in he did some Future Shocks as well, but he'd worked for Marvel UK. He did like a text strip with some illustrations by somebody else called Night Raven, which is like his vigilante, and he worked on Captain Britain and also on
remember that
Future Shocks. And then they roped him in '88, so this is still long before Vertigo, which didn't start till '93. And so about 4 years after Alan Moore, who started in February '84 with the anatomy lesson. But at some point they go, this character, perhaps we should do something with it, Constantine. And he did about 3 years on that. It was actually followed up by Peter Milligan, who we'll come to later. And it was interesting stuff because he was obviously familiar with the traveling community, and they had one story where he meets up with this group of travelers, and he gets off with this woman who's got a daughter as well.
The fear machine.
They're thinking, and the daughter's like, she thinks he's coming to steal this guy's magic, who's basically their shaman from the travelers, But Constantine is out for himself anyway. Obviously, always is con jobs they call him. And then he has to leave the country, because he's like thinking, because Mighty Mouse, his Rasta neighbor, got ripped limb from limb by this demon. And I think his landlady as well. And he's like, I better leave the country, and that's so he goes over to America to escape the long arm of the law, who in fact aren't even looking for him, it turns out. But that's how he gets to America, and all sorts of different things happen.
Well, I got into Hellblazer, Mick, through you, as we were saying before we started recording. I think the first one I bought, it was quite late on. It was about 20-something when it was the funeral of his father. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And I think, was it his niece was being haunted by the ghost of his father? You remember that issue?
Well, I think his dad was still alive, wasn't he? But his niece definitely was...
The family man, the serial killer, had killed him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was definitely something where Gemma, the niece, was getting involved in something woozy.
That's it, Gemma, yeah. So she was being haunted by Constantine's father's ghost. And
crazy.
He'd done some kind of weird spell to piss off his dad or something years ago, and so his spirit couldn't get to rest,
Typical, yeah. There was some pretty crazy stuff in the early issues, and that one season that they did as a TV series with Matt, what's his name? Not Matt Damon, Matt Thingamajiggy.
Matt Ryan.
Matt Ryan, yeah.
He was good.
He was good. He was in the what do they call Legions of Tomorrow? He made some guest appearances there, and they thought, we can perhaps do something with this character, Constantine. And they actually did use some of the early stories. There was one where there was this serial killer basically abducting girls and killing them. And I think Gemma got abducted as well, and he managed to save her, but the other three were already dead. It was like he'd killed them, and Gemma was seeing their ghosts, and it was like, oh yes, you can also be his bride and that. And then John manages to ride in on his silver charger and save the day from this really unpleasant child killer. And they adapted that as well for the TV series. It was a pity it didn't make it past one season, because there was some good stuff in there.
Yeah, it was good.
And Hellblazer, unfortunately, it went for let me lie. I've got them all here. I'll just have a quick look. There were various spin-offs as well.
It was Jimmy Delano, then Garth Ennis took over, didn't he?
Well, no, Peter Milligan was after Delano, and Garth Ennis later. Yeah, I can't see there's that many.
Peter Milligan.
There was about 130 issues, and then I guess it was falling sales, and they tried to revive it a few times. They did it as Constantine, and then as Hellblazer again, and Sisburia took over, and that wasn't bad, but every time it just never really took off. I guess the sales weren't good enough to keep it going.
That's it.
And later on, they actually did, I think Peter Milligan did Justice League Dark way later, like 2008 or something. But anyway, they used Constantine and the Demon and various other people as Zatanna and their sort of occult version of the Justice League. It wasn't bad, But anyway, that's way off in the future.
To 300. They got to 300 issues, didn't they? And they stopped it, as far as I remember.
I don't think it's
Peter Milligan was writing it at the end, because I've got issue 250 upstairs.
Really?
It's like it was like a special with a few guest.
This is a late one. Yeah, you're right. Milligan was much later, and 295. Yeah, you're probably about right. So you probably made it to 300. It's like, okay, had a good innings. We're finishing now.
That was an amazing run, yeah. But it's a shame they cancelled it when it got to 300.
I mean, you got to think 12 issues a year, so that's like 300. It's like 8 or 9 years or something, And there were loads of spin-offs like Chaz the Knowledge and Lady Joanna Constantine, who turned up in the Sandman, So it's like, right, had to be a woman, of course. But it was good. And there were also people like Ian Rankin, who's a very successful crime author who did all the Rebus books. He did one with I think it might have been David Lloyd even, The Horrorist. And Brian Azzarello, of course, was doing it for a while, but there was a big controversy about some issue he wrote involving gun violence, and they pulled him from the series. Lots of people, and Garth Ennis for a long time as well.
Yeah, that's the one I remember the most. Garth Ennis.
There were various other ones, and
Jamie Delano was my favourite.
He was good, because he had his own individual voice, and of course people took it different ways in their own directions. Garth Ennis got on my nerves in the end. He was just like pub stories and jokes and stuff, and at one point John descends into alcoholism because his girlfriend leaves him, and then he just a couple of weeks later he's just having a pint with the lads. It's like, no, that's not how it works, mate. Anyway,
no way. Yeah,
I mean, you might say, okay, he's got occult powers, but you don't become a bum drinking lighter fluid, or and then suddenly you're down the pub with your mates having a. So I thought Garth Ennis got just too much a bit like, let's have a couple of jokes down the pub with the lads. It's like, But he wrote some good stories as well. He was, I think, the one that they based the film on, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Bad Habits or Dangerous Habits or whatever it was, where he gets cancer.
Really good.
Yeah. And the film was good as well. Story. I mean, even if you account for Keanu Reeves, I thought he did a good job. And it was just amazing to see Tilda Swinton as the angel, It's another character from the stories, the snob. It's like basically this angel who's down on Earth. He's like, of course, he's got his nose turned up because he's an angel, and constantly
Gabriel.
Like, on it,
Something like that. It was a good movie. It's kind of like, I think it's kind of, what's the word? It's unfairly dismissed, I think, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was good. There was some creepy stuff in there, like the worm man, and then even at the beginning when he's getting the demon out of the woman in the slums and into the mirror, and it goes out the window and lands on Chaz's cab, It's like some pretty good stuff in there. So that was Hellblazer. That was the second title. And then we're on to Grant Morrison.
Talking Morrison with Grant.